What is going on, y'all? This is Mo, and today we have the video you've all been waiting for, okay? This is a Fractal 75, but inside the Fractal 75 is the HDZero AIO, the mythical, the fabled 5-in-1 with HDZero digital VTX in the board. One board, you see that? One board. Amazing. You knew it was coming. In this video, we're going to review the board itself. We're also going to review the race bind and fly that should be out today when this video releases. I had that before I put this board in this Fractal literally yesterday because I wanted to get some footage of 75 flying on the AIO as well. So we have the best of both worlds. I'm going to be doing more videos on this build in the future, but for now, let's get right into it. I know it's exciting. Couple days from release, so let's revisit, see if I can bust this thing up. Pretend I'm a racer. Ready? This is the course. I'm gonna go through here, around the pole, over the gate, down, around, through the pole, and the last gate's a tough one, through that. Ready for this? Let's go. Sorry for the long introduction. I wanted to fly this quad in the way I think it was designed to be flown. You know, it is the race bind and fly after all, and I am by no means a racer, but I will tell you I was actually having fun doing these laps around my basement here. Yeah, it was a good time. You know, I'm usually a freestyle pilot, but it's fun to go somewhat fast every once in a while. This is the HDZ AIO in the form of their race bind and fly. Now they're going to come out with two. HDZero is releasing two bind and fly quads alongside the AIO, the Freestyle and the race bind and fly. I have an earlier make of the race bind and fly. It's actually a little bit heavier than, and take note of that crash.
I made it.
Those are the crashes that I had for about a week straight. In the week leading up to this release here. I've had this quad for a while, but toward the last week or so, I really wanted to see if I could break it within reason, and I didn't. I just ended up breaking a camera. More on that later in the desk portion of the video, but yeah, HDZero is going to be releasing two bind and flies. A Freestyle, slightly heavier 65mm with the AIO, of course, and the Lux Camera, which is a nicer camera. Not quite V3 level, but close to it. And also, they're going to be releasing the race version, which is what I have. Again, an earlier version, so a little bit heavier. Mine is a little bit bastardized, if that's a word I can say. And that's going to come out lighter, 19.3 grams advertised, with the Eco camera, so a little bit lighter of a cam here. And alongside the AIO board, you can buy each of them individually. Check out this power loop. Totally meant to do that. Buy each of them individually or in the bind and fly format.
Didn't really talk too much about the quad. Hopefully you can see, I guess, how it's flying. It was flying pretty darn good.
Ooh.
You know, I'm not a 65
Battery's low. I'm
aficionado.
gonna bring it back though.
So I guess the weight didn't really bother me. This quad was about 20 or so grams. Some racers, I'm sure, would scoff at that. Like, that is way too heavy. But for general flying or general fun, which is how I usually like to fly, I didn't have any real problems with it. You know, getting about 2.5 minutes on average on a 300 mAh beta lava battery. That's pretty much exclusively what I was flying with this quad. And yeah, it was just a good time. This is still a 65 format, the Race Bind and Fly. Just brought it outside to showcase a little bit of the range and the performance of the quad outside. I don't really like flying 65 outside, but it certainly can do it. And here's a little bit of a range test for you. Around 200 milliwatts R1. Not too bad. Not too bad. I'm using the HDZero goggles. Keep that in mind. The range and penetration is greatly increased with using the HDZero goggles. You know, you have those 4 antennas. I have 4 Omnis doing a good amount of work, but, you know, decently impressive for a little 65. You'll notice a little bit of jello in the image. That is because of the camera mount, and it is because my props are beat up. I just don't really replace them. You can eliminate that with either a soft mount, TPU mount, or probably better props. And finally, this was just yesterday. I ported it over to a 75, just a little bit of flight example footage on the Superior platform. Shots fired, 75 millimeter, at least for flying outside. This is on a Fractal 75 frame with 30,000 0802 motors from Tiny Whoop, and it was flying real good. This was like a 2 battery tune as well. I didn't put much work into this tune, and it was flying smooth. You know, similar range. My range got a little bit worse in this configuration. It's probably because I routed the antenna inefficiently, because that is an important thing to note. We'll get more into that later. But, you know, if you're going to buy the HDZ AIO, you can just slap it in whatever you want, 75, 65, toothpick even. I prefer 75. All right, so here we are at the desk. Very exciting bind and fly to go over here. So we're going to spend a little bit of time. I'm going to break this down, and we're going to show the board and a little bit of a closer look. I'm actually going to port this into a 75 build. Don't know if I'm going to show it in this video. I might save that for a later video, but we are going to break it down and take a closer look at the board. Right off the bat, I just want to go over the specs of the board. So this is the HDZ AIO. So you get the HDZero VTX on board, as well as a 4-in-1 BL Heli S ESCs. You know, each of them are 5 amp, and we have SBI ELRS. So non-UART, we do have the SBI, but, you know, on Betaflight 4.4 and above, it's really easy to bind via the receiver tab. You just throw in your binding phrase, and you're good to go. So I don't really mind the SBI. I don't really notice, for a Whoop especially, any problems with range. Now, I have not custom, a Frankenstein build, because I've had the AIO for a bit now, and I've flown it and broken some canopies. I changed the props around. You know, mine are a little beat up here. So you're not going to get exactly this configuration. I will show a photo on the screen of the configuration and some of the details here while I'm doing this stuff. So mine's actually a little bit heavier, and, you know, it's a little weathered at this point. But yeah, it's held up. I'm happy to report it's held up. The AIO has held up fine through various abuses that I put it through, especially toward the latter half of me having it. At first, I didn't want to break it. You know, I wanted to make sure I got a video up for y'all. But especially in the last week or so, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to send it and see what happens. You know, I want to check the durability on this thing. I crashed it 100 million times inside, which is, you know, pretty hard crashes because it's downstairs in the basement where I fly. We get hard flooring, and everything is fine on it. I'm happy to report I did break a camera, and I'll show some of that video right here. I think that is the IR filter. The IF filter, the infrared filter, kind of came loose, which is kind of typical of any camera that you just bash around. But the AIO itself, which is, you know, the important part, is fine. And the motors are also fine. You know, sometimes these Happy Model motors can have slip shafts. but didn't experience any of that, and I bashed this thing up, man. And it's not that light, especially my configuration is 20 or so grams. The retail is going to be 19 or so, and sometimes mine was up to 21 because I used the OG Mob6 canopy for a while to protect it, and it's completely fine. So this is the AIO in all its glory. Now this is the lighter weight option with the Eco Cam, and there's also going to be a Lux Cam available upon release, which is just a better looking camera, and I'm most interested in that cam, especially because I'm going to be porting it over to a 75. One important thing to note about this configuration is this antenna, you always want to route it right out the back. Don't route it over the board in any type of way, as I did notice reduced range, and that is claimed or backed up by HDZ. Ryan Quellet confirmed that as well. You do want to just route that off the back for the best possible range. Let's get a weight on this thing, just in its board configuration here. Now, I mean, you can shorten up the wires, you can shorten up this pigtail, and even use maybe a lighter weight antenna if you want to get this down further. I don't know if you can see that. 9.86 for the whole kit and caboodle here. So, I mean, is that good for racers? I know racers are gram pinchers. We could also remove the plugs fairly easy, and there are some nice motor pads to solder onto on this build. So we can definitely bring the weight down. This is just the base configuration, or what you'll expect to get, give or take, I'm sure, half a gram or so. And yeah, you'll notice just as the Eco board, our camera connection is no longer via a MIPI cable. We just have the straight wire connections. Easy to swap out, easy to replace should you break one like I did. And this is the Eco Cam. You know, we have the lightest option here. This would be best for racing or if you're really concerned about weight. But that Lux camera isn't too much heavier, and I don't have one. I know Nick Burns definitely has one. Obviously, check his video out day one. I'm sure he's going to go over that camera. That's what I'm most interested in, and that's what I would prefer on a 75 build, as I think the camera quality is almost similar to the HDZero V3 cam, which is a beautiful cam.
But considering this is like a half bind and fly review, half HDZ board review, I do want to go over the parts on the bind and fly. You know, happy model 0702 28,000 kV motors are a good choice. You know, I was getting around 2.5 minutes of flight time, fairly aggressive flight time on these motors. So I think that's about average or reasonable for an HD whoop. We have the Mob6 2024 frame here, which is just somehow super durable. You know, they must have found the right balance of squishiness and rigidity, because I didn't break a duct. I didn't break anything on this thing. And this is a heavy whoop. So, you know, a pretty darn solid setup. I don't like the canopy that comes with the bind and fly. It's a little bit too high of an angle for me. So I usually swap it out to maybe a TPU print. Where's that? Do I have one? This is my old camera that I had broken here, but something like this, a TPU print, that gives a little bit more adjustment as far as our camera angle. But probably the best option for protection, I would still say, would be the Mob6 canopy, which you can use on this the Eco Cam at least. I'm unsure about the Lux, but you know, it fits on the back. There's 2 screw holes here, so you'd have that mounting. There are also TPU prints available that do the same thing that you can screw right into, and you can use this canopy. Definitely the best for protection, but definitely a little bit heavier. Pick your poison. If it doesn't matter for you, if you'd rather have the protection, Mob6 definitely a good way to go for that. And I'm curious to see how lightweight that racers are going to be able to get this AIO build, you know, maybe down to 18, 17 grams even, if we, you know, skeletonize the frame, do a bunch of other weight-saving techniques that I'm not going to do. I'm going to go the other way and make it heavier on a 75. So I'm going to do that now, probably throw in a fractal build to have, you know, beautiful no ducks in view and see how that flies on some 0802s. But man, the durability, that was the main thing I think that we're all concerned with. And for me, it's been good, and I did really severely abuse it, you know, crashed it as I would any other whoop in my basement on hard flooring, and it has survived. Now, it's been good for me. I asked a couple different reviewers. It's also been good for them, but definitely check the other videos that are coming out today or whenever you're watching this, and see if, you know, the durability is the same for everyone else. I can only speak on my experience, but it's been really good for me. I'll catch up with you in a bit.
And that about wraps it up here for the HDZero 5-in-1 board and the race bind and fly to a certain extent. what can I say? I think a lot of people expected, were hoping, maybe even knew this was coming. And does it hold up to expectations? I think the most important thing, and just as a quick summary of everything I had gone over, the most important thing that this board needed to have was durability. HDZero, especially some of the earlier VTXs, haven't been the most durable things, at least in my experience. You know, maybe have a somewhat of a bad crash, and all of a sudden my video goes away. Couldn't happen on an AIO, especially one that maybe is going to run, I think, about $99, about $100 just for the board. So durability was the number one thing that I was concerned with, as I'm sure most of y'all were. And for me, in my experience, and I recommend you look to others for others' experiences as well, because maybe I got lucky, maybe I don't fly like you do or other people do, but this held up. This really did. And I had been flying it really pushing it. I was pushing it for the last week or so, indoors and outdoors, you know, bashing it into walls onto the basement floor, which is a hard flooring, and it survived. I did break a camera. I mean, that kind of happens. It was sort of infrared filter, I think, got loose in there. Whatever, you can replace the eco camera, but the board was the main thing I was concerned about. And for me, it withstood, you know, more abuse than I typically give my quads, because I'm flying outside over grass. I was racing in my basement, hitting many a thing, and it survived. And I just want to kind of address something. I don't think this board is necessarily a lot lighter than some of the options that we've had as far as external VTXs go. For example, if you went with the old Eco kit and like a Super X FC from Happy Model, you're going to be really close to the weight of this single board in those two boards. Maybe I could be a little bit incorrect about that. If we were to really reduce the weight, or try to reduce the weight as much as possible on this build, this would end up being maybe a little bit lighter, but I don't know if that's necessarily the goal. Not having to deal with two boards is a huge win. As far as whoops go and micros, you just have one board, and if it's solid and durable, I would take that trade, especially if it's a wash, and even if this ends up being slightly lighter than, I think that's a good thing. And I spoke to Carl a couple months ago when he did send this to me to try out, and he said that he had the ability to make this board lighter insofar as we make it thinner, but that could reduce the durability. And I think it's the right call to not push it and make it so light, you know, we save maybe an extra gram and severely reduce our durability. I think the average pilot, most pilots, would trade, you know, a little bit of weight for a durability, especially when you're paying a good deal of money for an AIO board. You know, this board does come with SPI ELRS, not UR ELRS is what we're kind of been used to, especially with recent iterations of boards. SPI ELRS isn't really that bad at all. You know, with Betaflight 4.4 and above, you can just enter in your binding phrase and bind it up no problem. I don't really notice any range reduction in SPI, especially with little copper wire antennas. They're actually pretty solid compared to maybe, you know, the Beta 4-in-1 with the little external RX with no antenna. The range was severely reduced on that versus an SPI board like this one. So I have no problem with that. Maybe in the future they can include UR ELRS, but again, no real problems. Now, when you're watching this, another camera is already available for this board. It's called the Lux Camera, and it is a little bit heavier, but from what I've seen, the picture is a lot better than what is on the Eco camera. The Eco camera is the lightest option, but if you're looking for a better video quality, similar to that of the V3 camera, then you would be interested in checking out the Lux. I know I'm interested, and for a 75 build that can handle, you know, an extra half a gram, I think that's going to be the choice for you. But just take a look at it before you make your decision and see which one you rather have and the one that suits your build the best. But all in all, happy with what HDZ has put out. This is a huge step forward for micros, huge step forward for whoops. I'm going to be flying a lot more HDZero. I'm never going to get rid of all my analog stuff. I know there's some hardcore analog pilots out there who may have gotten offended when I said HDZero marks the end of analog. That will never be the case. But it is nice to have a system that rivals analog in a lot of ways. You know, latency. Now we have a 5-in-1. Some people just like pretty pictures, and HDZero is definitely better looking than analog, and now that we have a single board solution, I'm sure it will sway a lot of people, but to each their own. There's a use case for every system, and HDZ's just got a little bit better. Anyway, this has been Mo. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.